Welcome to Dayton Virtual Art in the City 2020 and the watercolor tutorial. I'm Charlene Fox, and I'm going to walk you through using the supplies provided in the kit for this event, creating a painting that is very similar to this, inspired by this, and should look like something like this when we're finished. Again, my name is Charlene Fox. I am an artist that is mainly working in watercolor. I've been playing with art supplies for about 7 years. Started playing with mixed media and fell in love with watercolor. The things I really like about watercolor, initially, one of them was the accessibility. It's so easy to pick up and set down. All you need is water to clean out the brushes, to clean things up. It also is a medium that is just really fun to play with. It has a mind of its own sometimes, and you can use that to your advantage. And one of my favorite things to do really is just watch the watercolor play. And that's really what this other small painting behind me was just watching the watercolor play. It's just fun to do, and you don't have to have a really strong drawing skill set or anything else to start playing with it and get good results. So the kit that's been provided is a piece of nice watercolor paper. I believe it's a 6x9 format. The Crayola washable watercolors. It comes with a round brush, and there's also a flat brush provided. These are surprisingly nice watercolors that work well for this effort. You can certainly upgrade to other materials that will give you some different results. Good idea to just wash it out a little bit. Sometimes they come with some kind of additive that keeps them pointed. I'm not sure if these do, but still it's a good practice to wash them out. So what else I have here? I have 2 jars of water. Now, there are a lot of different approaches to the way people use their water jars. The way I have in mind to, but don't always adhere to, is to have one that's for dirty water and one that's for clean water, so that you're always washing out your dirty brush in this one and grabbing clean water out of this one, so you can dilute the watercolor with clean water instead of dirty. I'm not very good at rules, so I don't always adhere to it, but you can always change out the water whenever you want as well. I like to use a washcloth that's sitting on that I can use to dab out and clean off my brush, or just pull some more of the water and the paint off. A paper towel is a really good idea as well, because part of the properties of watercolor is managing the water to paint ratio. Another thing I really recommend, especially with any new set of paints, is to do a swatch card. I won't walk through this whole thing, but it's basically just taken across the top, one little swatch of each of the colors, and down the side the same, and then in this little matrix to mix them, and then you can have a good visual representation of the colors that you can get out of this set, and you can reference this when you think about what color you want and how to mix it. So we're going to recreate this painting, and the other material that I'm using for this that's not in the kit is some masking tape. Any kind of masking tape, you are going to want to be very careful when you take it back off. I did rip this a little bit, so we'll talk about that when we get to the end, but it can give you a nice clean edge line, and it tends to make it look a little more professional and complete. It's not necessary. You can skip that if you want. All right, and the top one. And if you really want to be precise about it, you can measure and put little light pencil marks that if you don't paint over, you will be able to erase later. So one of the properties of this paint is that it is designed to be washable. which makes it even a little bit more manageable or changeable after you've put it down. Some regular watercolor paints have more staining power than others. My playing with these has resulted in actually being able to wash off the whole thing with just a little bit of a shadow if you really feel like you need to at some point. Not necessarily recommended, but all right, so this paper, I believe there is a right side and a wrong side, and the wrong side would be the smoothest and the right side would be the one that shows that it feels like it has a little bit more tooth bumpiness to it. So that will give us a nice border. And the way we're going to start we're going to start with background and work on this gradation of the sky. I'm also going to use my little swatch card because this blue is just a little too bright and garish for me for a sky. So what I really liked and what I used was more along this line, which to me surprisingly was the blue and the purple. So a little purple, a little blue, and like I said, the rule is supposed to be that the brush only goes in dirty in this one and only clean in that one. So that's kind of mixed up. I'm going to use this flat brush to just kind of start putting some water on the paper. So you don't want it sopping wet, but what we want to end up with is it glistening. I don't know if you can start to see where it is on the paper, but this is going to be a wet in wet process, and we're going to take this down to about 2/3 or about 2/3 of the way down, and have the horizon line be about 2/3 down. So I'm going to put one right there. It doesn't have to be real exact. And the idea is just to get some water on it so the paint will move. Again, that's one of the properties of watercolor, is using the water and getting the paint to move and interact with the water. All right, so that's wet and it won't stay that wet too long. So starting at the top, I do see some loose hairs here, so you might want to pull those out as you see them. Don't get too excited if they're on the paper, they'll dry and come off. But so we're taking this, starting at the top where we expect it to be the darkest, and starting to paint down a little bit, and I'm going to add more pigment at the top and then even tilt it a little bit to let it start to flow down. We'll see how this works today. And then I'm going to start at the bottom with some of the red but diluted. So I'm going to put the dirty brush in there, and then I'm going to use the clean brush to get some water and dilute this so that we have a lighter color. In watercolor, we don't usually use white, we use water to make something lighter. And my brush was not clean, so I'm going to try to clean it off a little bit better. Don't really want purple there yet. It's part of the expected result, but not there. So pink down here. Now I'm going to tilt that the other way. And you can see the water's running in and making a background there, but that's really quite manageable with this paint. I think we'll just play back and forth a little bit with it. And then in the middle, some yellow. You need to be a little bit careful when you're adding yellow to skies, because it's very easy to end up with an attractive green for a sky, but I would like to have some orange in here, so I'd like these two to mix, but I'm leaving a gap between the yellow and the blue so it won't mix quite so readily. And again, this paint really is quite forgiving, so we can fix things like this as we go. I'm going to use my paper towel just to grab some of that extra water. All right. Now let's go back to the blue and tidy that up. And depending on the quality of the watercolor paper you have, it will tend to buckle or bend more the more water you add. This is holding up very nicely. I think that this is a cellulose watercolor water paper, and to get some really good properties out of the paper, cotton is the best, but it's much more expensive and it's not necessary when you're starting, unless you start to get frustrated with the results you're getting. And in general, I think watercolor paper is the most critical supply to have the best quality you can get. So I'm just letting the water move this a little bit. And my intent is to have this pretty light across the board, so it may be even hard to see some of them. Now what I would like to do though is darken up the top. And I want a little bit darker blue to add to the corners at least. So that is this color, which is the blue and the red mixed, which should be purple, but this seems to be not quite. And again, I violated my rules. Blue and red. But this does seem to give it a nice, it's purpley, but it's much darker than the other. So we'll just add then a little bit more of the blue, and then see if we can get it to move. Not sure if that's easy to see or not. And that blue just by itself is too tealy for me. So I'm going to add some of the mix of the purple and blue. Generally, you don't want to play too much with it while it's moving and doing its thing. Okay. So we're going to let this dry completely before we move on, and we'll see how this, what the result is after it's dried. We want to tweak that just a little bit. I think we'll leave this alone for right now. It's not the way I want to leave it long term, but for right now, let's leave that alone, and we're going to move down and work on, we'll work on the tree line in the background. The tree line in the distance is farther away. That means that the detail will be, it will be less detailed, it will be more fuzzy, not very precise, and that's what we'll use to our advantage to give that illusion of depth from that background. So for that, I'm going to really kind of use just a combination of greens. On my little swatch card here, I'm going to start with green and orange to get a little bit more earthy looking green. This is pretty bright and neon-y, straight out of the pan. And the other thing to keep in mind, and I am I am not picky about how I keep my palette. If it gets contaminated, it's quite easy to clean up. So I know a lot of people freak out about that and don't like it, but it's not usually a problem for me, and it can be cleaned up quite easily. So now I'm just kind of taking this in and smishing it around in a very kind of haphazard way right along that horizon line we built or left, and giving the illusion of some trees in the distance. Uneven. But I also want some darker green, and that's a good one with the brown and the green. This brown is very red, so, but there is a better brown to be had, which is right here. For me, I mean a cooler, darker brown, that is the brown and the black, and we'll use that in a minute. All right, but now I want a darker green, so I'm going to use the green and the brown. And this palette has black in it, but typically, I forgot what I was doing. Typically, watercolor painters in general, I would say, probably don't tend to use prepared blacks very much. So you can mix your own, and I'll show you a little bit about that in a minute too. The paper towel can be very handy if you make a mistake and get something where you don't want it, just dab it up. And especially with this paint, it's not something to be concerned about. Do not freak out. I want some green with some yellow. Get a little bit brighter to some of the tops. And then, because I really would like it more kind of washy and not a hard line down at the bottom, I'm going to take some clean water and start below that line and move up to kind of kiss it and let it move and flow down a little bit. That'll just take away that really hard line. I want brown and green and then some black. I'm going to use the black, but now it's a lot more brown and black than green. So one of the things you can do is just drop in colors and drop them over each other, and they'll just play. And oftentimes that results in more interesting stuff than what you intended to start with. I'll let that be a minute. So part of what I had down here too is something kind of mimicking like a field, a farm field that had been plowed a little bit. We'll do a little bit with some yellow, yellow and brown. Give kind of a yellow ochre. Just a little hint and a splash. All right, we're gonna let that dry now. So the next thing we'll work on is the tree. And it's in the foreground, so it's more detailed, darker than the stuff in the background. That helps give that sense of dimension to the whole piece. So we need a brown, and again, this brown that comes straight out of the pan here is really, really red for me. So there's a lot of choices here, but this is kind of the darkest, the black and the brown. The purple and the yellow are a kind of good brown. We will start with the brown. And the black. The yellow and the brown make a nice brown too. And this looks pretty dark, but I think at least initially going on, it won't be super dark. So we're gonna put the tree over on the left third of the paper and have some of the branches going off the page and some of them moving into the page, and just starting down somewhere down here. I know this looks really dark, but it will be manageable. Just think about a tree and go look at a tree before you start this if you want, and just kind of think in terms of a trunk and then branches. And branches start off lower than you might think and go all wonky directions. And this is just kind of intuitive, playing, make jaggedy shapes in the direction of a tree. And to make the composition work well, we want the tree to go up a little higher in the sky than that might be inclined to right now. It will work with this, and I don't like that, so I'm going to wet that paper towel just a little bit and lift some of that up. Just dab it with the wet, and then a dry spot, lift it up. And I've now decided I don't like that lower limb that low. So let's see what we can do. Generally, it's better to use your mistakes and not try to correct them, but this paint is quite forgiving, so I'm going to correct that one. And you probably want to avoid scrubbing motions, but dabbing will work. And since that did end up really dark, I've added some more brown, and I'm going to add just a tad of green. There. It's a little bit higher. Yeah, you want to think about like organic shapes, and I'm going to switch over and see how this brush works. Lend itself a little bit more to that. So let's see what happens. And you can leave gaps. We're going to put leaves on these branches, so if you leave gaps, it'll give us a spot to go to. And just don't think it's a good idea to try to be precise with this. I like to have little roots down in the bottom to make it more grounded, so just kind of a lot like the branches, just kind of organic, how you're used to seeing roots grow along the ground. All right, I tried to let this dry a little bit more than the previous time, and I don't think I'd mentioned that you can use a hairdryer to speed up the drying process. Just don't get it too hot, don't get too aggressive about it, but hairdryer on a low setting on the front and on the back can help speed the drying process a little bit more. So now let's see about some leaves. We're going to go with the green and the orange to start. It's a quieter green. We can add the lighter green later. can kind of roll your brush and you want to go in different directions. And there again is the property of the paint that it makes it really water soluble, no matter how dry it is. And just thinking about how trees grow and how the leaves go, and they're all up and down branches, and some sticking out away from the branches a little bit. Let's try this flat brush. Those are all looking very round. There's nothing wrong with that, but I'm going to take the tiniest bit of blue and some green and some orange. Let's see what we get here. It's not a lot different color. You can use the flat brush to give a little bit more a different shape of leaves, kind of straighter, flatter. And now I'm just mixing to see what I like. And typically if you start mixing more than two colors together, you often get more muddy colors, which sometimes you want and sometimes you don't. So kind of on the ends and the top, you can add slightly lighter, brighter, imagining the sun coming from the top right. We will do a little bit of shadowing and shading and the illusion of the sun coming across. So along the side where the sun would be coming from, and the top is going to be just a little bit lighter. I'm going to start with the brown, which is kind of dark, but not so dark in this situation. And kind of just add a whole bunch of colors. And let's see what we end up with. But typically, if you stick to the darker colors, I'm going to leave out yellow, but I'm going to go with all of these and the red. Make sure we've got the whole color wheel balanced. This is then going to be a little bit darker, maybe, than the black. And on this palette, I'd add black too, but you can make it a tad darker than it already is by just mixing some of those colors. And I'm just going to put it out here. That's going to be a really dark green right now. It's inclining towards green to me anyway. So I'm going to add this down here at the bottom of the tree line. And I'm going to grab some not so dark green and start putting it in. And this will just kind of ground it a little bit more and give it the illusion of the light being in the back. I can do the same thing I did previously with just kind of wetting it down below and let it bleed in a little bit. Yeah, and I have a tendency to just not think that much about what I'm doing and start mixing colors and adding things in. But I'm looking at the greens and trying to get a little variation in there. I don't even know what we had mixed there anymore. Just to give some variation in depth. I don't like the way those spots are looking. I'm going to dry my brush off and just sop up the edges a little bit so I can shape them a little bit different. They're not all. And this paint, once it's wet, it starts lifting the color. So, but you can just smush that around a little bit and soften the edges of stuff. And I wanted to also make a little bit more of a shadow on the left side of the tree. to give that illusion of the sun coming from the other direction. So I'm going to drop in a little bit of this darker just along that left side mostly, and kind of on the bottom edges of some of the branches that were in here on the left side. Just thinking about the sun coming from above, then the bottom edges of the branches would be darker and the left side would be darker. It's not going to be a huge difference, but it can have a good effect. Soften that line a little bit, which with this paint makes it lift. And I'm not happy with that color now because it's too different. So I'm going to add some brown and some green. See if I can make it blend a little bit better. It's not a big deal, but this is fairly forgiving, so it's one of the things I like about it. You may not always get it to do exactly what you want, but if you work within its properties, you can have some lovely effects. Pull these roots down a little bit more. All right. I also would like to have just a bit of a shadow down here with the tree. So I'm taking a very diluted version of the really dark we had and just gonna put it in here, starting at the base and making it look a little like a shadow. Don't want to get too carried away, and I'd like to soften these edges if I can with a damp but not very wet brush. And instead of throwing some more water on here and having it bleed out, I don't really want it to move very far. I just want to soften the edge, so that's why I'm choosing this as opposed to that. Okay, that's okay. All right, so let's look at what we've got going in the sky now, since I've dropped water across it somehow, and I had been thinking that especially with this paint, that we could do some clouds. We'll do a little lifted. So I'm going to use a clean water, not a whole bunch on the brush, and I'm thinking about wispy clouds, partly because they're easier to do, I think. And pull this kind of across with a damp brush. Now right now it's just looking darker, but with this paint, actually I'm going to try this brush. Let's see what we can do with this. Yeah, you might want to be a little careful with this paper. That does look like it was, I don't know if it was taking some of the paper off. Didn't think it would, but this brush is a little bit stiffer though, so it could do more. So do this lightly. Don't dig into the paper, or it may start peeling off some of the paper. Let's put some curves in them. Actually, the curves should probably be on top. Clouds usually have flatter bottoms and curves on top, I think. These colors stay pretty vibrant, and typically watercolor dries a little bit darker, or sorry, a little bit significantly lighter than you start with. So these stay quite nice and bright. What you see is what you get. So this might have done it. So I'm going to add some green along the way too, so that they have a chance to blend a little bit together. That's too much water. And some water, just so they can play it a little bit. I'm going to do a little yellow and brown. It doesn't take a lot to add a little additional visual interest. Orange and red. And brown. Brown is mostly red. And this palette, and black. Dull it. So I'm trying to get a little bit of a red without being overwhelming. I'm going to do some blue and purple. Just giving us a darker, more cooler blue. Add a little bit of this dark red here, and do really carefully, maybe. Yeah, not. I'm just going to just try to add a little bit of darkness at the bottoms of the clouds to give the. They're usually darker on the bottom. So obviously that needs very little to have an effect. I had way too much to start. And that's way too harsh a line on the top. I don't mind the harsh line on the bottom because clouds tend to have straight bottoms, but we're going to do a little bit of lifting on the trunk of this tree on the right side, so you can emphasize the shadow on the left a little bit. This is a clean water on this flat brush, and just really gently and lightly taking up a little bit of that paint, splash water, and then cleaning the brush off again before I go back and do a little bit more. And this brush is a little bit stiff, so don't be gentle. Be gentle. And I'm going to take the paper towel and pick up a little bit more. So that's not a huge difference, but it's a little bit lighter now and gives a little bit more of that illusion. I also like to put in a little bit stronger horizon line. I don't want to get crazy with it. I'm taking my palette dirt here, some of the darker but diluted, and I'm gonna kind of sweep across in a broken line across there to give a little bit of a definition to the horizon line. All right, I'm gonna mix some more dark here because that picked up more than it put down. More green. And I want a little bit more definition up front with what we did with the field. Brown and yellow. That looks too orange to me. tiny bit of green to offset the orange. We'll see here. Yeah, it's a little more brownish, ochreish. Just some more lines right through there. All right, and now we're going to show you how to take the tape off carefully to make sure it doesn't tear the paper. So I'm not worrying about it on the back. There's some of the paper that's probably okay. Back. And the trick then is to pull it straight back, not up, but straight back. I'll show you. And slowly. Get this unconnected. So we'll start. So, not up here like that, but slowly this way. And the tape is taped to the tape. And see, it did rip a little bit because I went too fast. Maybe it will anyway. Hope not. So I would also say before you put the tape on, you might want to take some of the tackiness off. You can, oh, it's doing better now. You can put it on your, dab it on your jeans or some other cloth or the table to take some of the tackiness off. But it does give it a nice clean line. And it's a lovely watercolor paint.